Neuro-inclusion is asking us to take a look at the world around us, our environments, our systems, our norms, from the point of view of all neurotypes, because variance is normal. Variance is part of the biology of being a human being. And when we can see what those inherent barriers are, we have an opportunity to co-create a better world that works for everyone.
Hello and welcome, everybody. This is ADHD and with Jorie Houlihan. I am your hostess with the mostest, Jorie Houlihan, ADHD life coach, speaker, and your guide for the dopamine deprived. I have been very anxiously awaiting to interview my guest today. This is Tracy King. She is a speaker, a learning strategist, and neuro-inclusion advocate. They are a trusted advisor to learning leaders seeking to build inclusive, high-performing, AI-enabled education programs. As the CEO of Inspired Ed, Tracy partners with organizations to design scalable and impactful learning portfolios that drive engagement and measurable outcomes. With over 25 years in adult education, they specialize in neuro-inclusive design and serve as chair of the IACET, Neuro-Inclusion in CE-T research group. Tracy is the author of the award-winning book Competitive Advantage and a contributor to Microlearning in the Digital Age. Their work has been featured in Forbes, USA Today, NBC, and more. Welcome to the show, Tracy.
It is so great to be here. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Yes, I am too. Like I said, I have just been eagerly awaiting this. When you and I first spoke about doing this is something that I feel very strongly about, which is how do we have this conversation about neurodivergency, all of this stuff in the workplace, in associations, in organizations, et cetera. Before we get started, my first question to you is, can you define for listeners who may be new to this kind of conversation what neuro-inclusion is?
Yes. So, backing up to what neurodivergence is an umbrella of what we call neurotype variances. And those include ADHD, autism, learning differences like dyslexia, in addition to some acquired neurodivergent traits, which often come with complex trauma or with traumatic brain injury. And within that umbrella, we have a bunch of different people, at least 20% of the population, who think, learn, and relate differently. And our barriers aren't often noticed or seen. They're often inherent in systems that were designed for a neurotypical point of view. And so neuroinclusion is asking us to take a look at the world around us, our environments, our systems, our norms, from the point of view of all neurotypes, because variance is normal. Variance is part of the biology of being a human being. And when we can see what those inherent barriers are, we have an opportunity to co-create a better world that works for everyone.
And so how did you get into this work?
Well, once upon a time, I didn't realize I was neurodivergent. And my oldest was diagnosed with ADHD, and I was like, that's interesting. Yeah, I need to learn more about that. And then my second was assessed, diagnosed with ADHD, and I'm like, this is inherited. And I really did a deep dive into the neurotypes and trying to understand, because I completely missed that because we share the same way of being. And so I went through the whole mom guilt and grief around the fact that I didn't advocate for my kids. I taught them how to mask because I didn't understand that we had, neurodivergent neurotypes. Of course, I have 4 neurodivergent kids, as it turns out. And this became a passion of mine, and seeing, all of these inherent barriers that don't need to exist. There are just so many opportunities to clear them out of the way. And in my corner of the world, what can I do in order to make being a member of the workforce inclusive so that we can all make our best contribution? And that's the seed of where my work began, because I really want to change, how we approach workforce development so that not only my kids can have a better experience in the workforce, but that we can really help those who are late diagnosed as well, who have carried this burden for all of these years, to realize I'm not broken, that I can be supported in my way of being.
Yes. Yeah, I also have 2 neurodivergent kids, and, it's Very heritable. And it does make you, when it's just you, sometimes we tend to just kind of go, whatever. But like when your kids are the ones that you're like, well, how is this going to impact their future? Right. And you look at struggles in the workplace and in education and all of that stuff. And it really
Mm,
does make you start to say, okay, what can we do better here? So
absolutely.
when you and we spoke about the positive impact that people with ADHD have in businesses, organizations, right? The impact on innovation and creative problem solving. Even if there's just, I think you said too, like even if there's just one person on
Mm,
with ADHD on a team, but that there's still this resistance from organizations to really embrace that. So for leaders who want to make the business case for
mm.
neuroinclusion, but don't know where to start, what are like the hard numbers or stories that usually do open their eyes when you're speaking with them?
It's first important to realize that the recent study that I looked at, 88% of employees with non-apparent disabilities like neurodivergent choose not to disclose to avoid further discrimination. And so there is often an employer assumption that since people don't disclose, they're not here.
Mhm.
And we know that's not true. Further, year over year research does support the fact that disclosure does often result in increased bias and increased discrimination because we don't have the systems, the capabilities, the background in how to address the types of change that needs to happen in order to create inclusive workspaces and processes. We're in this, medical model disability thinking where we place the disadvantage in the person. It's their fault. They have to come up to speed and be more like us, and we'll consider their support needs on a case by case basis. What this results in is more sick leave. What this results in is increased turnover, which is costly for organizations. If we're going to build a business case, we got to think about the decreased productivity during profound executive function challenges and burnout phases because neurodivergent professionals aren't supported. But we also have to think in terms of the missed opportunity because, like we talked about, one ADHD person on a team significantly improves innovative problem solving. We all need that right now.
Yeah. Yes, we do.
Dyslexic professionals are super entrepreneurial. Autistic, professionals spot problems that others don't typically see, and they're virtually immune to groupthink, which is a problem in businesses that leads to terrible decision making.
Yes.
Not to mention the improvements that neurodivergent professionals ask for in the workplace benefit most people. Most people are like, yeah,
Yes.
I would like that too. Which
Mhm.
makes us all better, which makes the environment better for everybody, and which improves outcomes and productivity for everyone. It's just that these aren't optional for us, they're essential, but taking steps in a neuro-inclusive direction benefits everyone.
That actually was sort of the good lead into the next question, and you may have already answered it, but because there are hidden costs to not
Mm,
building true neuro inclusion into a workplace, or
mm.
any kind of organization, right? So, what would you consider to be some of the hidden costs, like financial? We just sort of briefly just touched on the emotional part of it too. I think is important, and just the organization of it, like the what am I looking for? Just the workplace environment in general. Could you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah. I mean, first, from an emotional perspective, when you think about going to work and the fact that you believe you cannot be yourself, you can't be your
Mm.
authentic self, bring you to work, you have to perform as what you feel is acceptable, what you feel will be liked, what you feel will get you a promotion and provide opportunities for you. And what affords that is masking. And masking is truly debilitating and potentially deadly. It's like another level of work that ADHDers, ADHDers are performing on top of their workload.
Mhm.
And nobody sees it because especially women, we're so good at it. But what happens is it creates deeper executive function challenges. It creates chronic illness, migraine, deep exhaustion that can't be remedied with a good night's sleep or a long weekend, decreased sense of identity, anxiety, depression, even suicidal ideation. And so it's really serious. And because so much of the neurodivergence experience isn't apparent, it's not observable, that the pressure to mask our way of being is not being addressed. So that's the emotional toll. And that's gonna, as people take on that responsibility, it's of course gonna impact their team. If they're a leader,
Mhm.
it's gonna impact how they lead. It can't not, because it's eroding that person's well-being. But from an organizational perspective, when we understand each other better, we work better together. I mean, there was a while, I'm gonna date myself, back in the 90s, in the early 2000s, when every workplace was, taking all of these assessments so we could find out what people's strengths were, what people's color were, how people communicate. And, it helped us, as we perceived, interact better, work better, lead better, team better. Well, if we understand neuro-inclusion, how people's neurotypes, same opportunities open up. It's like maybe that person
Mhm.
isn't being direct because they don't like you. Maybe it's because that's how they communicate, because they expect explicit and literal communication. Maybe they're not lazy. They actually require rest in order to show up in a manner to be their productive self. Maybe they're asking for some flexibility in hours that they work because their best brain hours are late at night, not 8 to
Mhm.
5, right?
Yes.
And so when we understand like how our nervous system and our brains work, we have a better opportunity to team in ways that make teams more effective, more productive, happier places for everybody.
I just love everything you just said there. I think, and you've mentioned this too, like companies really lose out when they don't understand that if they can give these kind of accommodations, right? Like if the person's not there to open the shop and it's not that big of a deal for them to do their work late at night and whatever, let them do it. Like it's only going to
Right.
benefit your company and you're going to get their best work. Yeah, there's just so many things that I think people miss out on because it's not what's considered quote unquote normal. And you mentioned too about the communication types, right? Like a lot of neurodivergent people are very blunt, they're very direct, and they expect that in return, and they don't like small talk. You know, I'll be honest, I freaking hate small talk. It's not that they like you said, it's not that they don't like you, they just be direct. That's all they want, you know? And so when you can
Yeah.
know that about somebody, I think it helps everybody in the long terms. How do you help coach organizations to move beyond the surface level DEI, right? I
Mm,
feel like a lot of companies give lip service to it, and
mm.
unfortunately now with what's going on, they can't even mention it in a lot of cases. So how do you help them move beyond that and actually integrate neuro-inclusion into the everyday culture and policy, because giving service to it is not the same as taking action, and I don't know that they know that.
So true, so true. So a couple of different ways. In the agency side of my business, we do event management and instructional design, work with portfolios of learning that advance workforces. We're talking about skill development, and which, these learning opportunities create opportunity for professionals. But not all professionals, if we don't interrogate how we design and how that design and how that learning is delivered. And so from the very first conversation with our clients, we start talking about what we mean by accessibility and inclusion to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to come to this table and to reap the benefits of this learning in order to create more opportunity for themselves to bring their best selves to work and really lead by example. And this is what this is going to mean operationally for how we produce this learning, but then how you continue to disseminate it, facilitate it, how it works in your learning management system. That design happens from the very beginning. It's not something that someone later says, oh, this doesn't work with me. Can we maybe? And you're like, no, that's too hard.
Mhm.
We start from the very first step saying, where are the barriers? Let's eradicate them so that
Yes.
everyone can succeed against learning objectives. From a consulting perspective, it's about shedding a light on these invisible norms and structures that we've created socially, but also physically, that inherently set up this huge swath, this huge sector of the workforce to fail from the start. And when we can have honest conversations about what the conditions are, we can start to have productive conversations about what does that mean for us? When we know that everybody in our team, in our organization is valuable, that we believe in the inherent worth of every single individual that's a part of our organization, then why wouldn't we consider what are the ways that we can identify reduce and remove barriers. And this is a conversation, it's not new. It's been happening in other sectors of the disability rights conversation. It happens intersectionally in the racial conversations, in LGBTQIA conversations about equal access and promotion and opportunity in the workforce. But we really have to start from the place of revealing what's hidden so that we can work on what's in front of us together, really being as practical as possible. So more concretely, my work is about consulting on what exists, facilitating that what's hidden, now what can we do conversation, conducting training, but then partnering that with kind of like a co-created operational strategy on what our work is together, realizing that, like we said, this benefits everybody. So it's not an accommodation conversation as much as how do we co-create a space that works for everyone so that we advance as an organization.
You hit on a couple of things. I love that you are talking about what's hidden because you can't solve challenges if you're not seeing them, first of all. And there are
Mm,
going to be people who don't know they exist. Going back to your point about how people who are neurodivergent have a tendency to not tell HR that
right,
they are neurodivergent, right? And so that is a huge hidden thing right there. And that's one that's, in my opinion, if people are open to it, easily solvable if
right.
people can be themselves and if we can have the honest conversation about it. I love that this is part of what you do, that you're making it happen in a way that other people like have done, oh, it'll be fine. And I'm like, we're a huge part of the workforce. Like you have to
Right.
acknowledge we're here. And didn't you tell me once that somebody said that you spoke to said, "Oh, we don't have those kind of people here," or something like that?
Yeah, I was a CEO of a really large professional association. We don't have those people here. It's like, excuse me, sir.
Ugh.
But if we
Oh.
can't see it, we can't fix it. And so that, that revealing what's hidden is a huge part of not only non-apparent disability experience,
Mhm.
but also so that we can really step into that co-creation of better spaces, more inclusive and productive spaces.
So let's talk a little bit about Gen Z walking into this workforce now, because they have very different expectations about a lot of things than we did. Because I was around also in the '90s and all, and so they have different expectations about neuro-inclusion and entrepreneurship, right? So what are you seeing within the Gen X community, and how can businesses keep up with that?
Mm. Yeah, you're hitting on a hot button right now. This is
No, I
a
am.
I've seen a few articles, even, really recently about how Gen Zs, they're getting fired. They're out of here. They're just like, we can't stand these kids, and to be clear, Gen Z are still in college and they're in early career. But
Mhm.
let's lay a foundation of this coming of age. Gen Zers are digitally native, they're socially committed, they're environmentally conscious. Those things matter to them. So when they are seeking employment, they're looking for that reflected in their employers. They don't remember the world before 9/11, right? So they've been raised amid economic and political upheaval. They've also been globally networked amid all of
Mhm.
that. Very different from our upbringing. They report
Yeah.
higher levels of mental illness and poverty
Mm.
because of stressors associated with college debt, with a cost of living crisis, with seeing corruption exposed in real time, right?
And nothing being
And
done about it?
and nothing being done about it. And they don't expect to have big families or own homes or even have a traditional career path. These ideals that are associated with the American dream, they don't see themselves in that story. They don't see that as available to them. Okay, so this is the baseline of their coming to age. So as they're stepping into the workforce, these are some pragmatic folks. They value direct communication. They value efficiency. They're going to challenge norms. They're going to ask why. Why are you doing it this
Mhm.
way? And that is often interpreted as disrespectful, not their
Mhm.
place, right? Not valued. They are first adopters of new technologies. They are imagining new ways to solve problems with them. But when we step into entry level roles, is that where that type of talent is sourced? Not usually, right? They're usually asked to do like task work, right? Less exciting to them. This is the most entrepreneurial generation to date. And the research is clear that on this, that their appetite for innovation is ahead of every past generation. And should be something that's valued in the workplace rather than suppressed, rather than telling them to pay their dues. We should be pulling a chair up to the table and asking them to help us solve problems. But more importantly, what I see in the frictions that employers are reporting about this generation are the fact that they are the most neurodivergent generation to date. In a recent Zen Business survey, more than 50% of the respondents identified as being neurodivergent, which, I mean, honestly really shouldn't surprise us because we're getting better at identifying it, and neurodivergent people make neurodivergent people.
Yeah. As you and I have both already demonstrated. Yes.
But this really helps us understand like some of these resistant factors more clearly. Are they challenging authority, or are they asking clarifying questions about why things are done because they can see a better way? Are they
Mhm.
demanding flexibility and that's wrong? That's disrespectful? Or maybe do they have sensory sensitivities? They work better late at night. They work better in environments they can control rather than under the, migraine producing fluorescence at work. Are they not showing up to work excited to be engaged in entry level task work and pay their dues? Maybe it's because their entrepreneurial brains need a bite of meaningful problem solving and that they are prepared more than most to drive needed innovation in organizations. All of that to say, Gen Z has a different skill set and they can't be treated like cogs and wheels. They're coming at this differently and they have a different vision of future that isn't, loyalty to a company until they die. They're looking for opportunities differently. They're side hustling. They're collaborating globally. And they're going to self-advocate more than any previous generation because they grew up under the ADA. They grew up with IDEA in schools. And so I think that we're really going to see a lot of disruption favoring neuro-inclusion thanks to Gen Z.
Yeah, it's so funny you say this because my sister and I, we were discussing because we both have 17-year-olds and they're going to be taking very different paths. And we were talking about how there is an element. Now she works in like a regular, more corporate kind of environment. And she's like, some of these kids come in here and they're just like wanting to have the same pay as those of us who've been here for 30 years and, whatever. And I was like, I think I wish universities were a little bit better at preparing them for the shock of you're not going to be the CEO right out of college. But
Hmm.
I also agree with you that because they are seeing the world just very differently than we are because of the circumstances they up in, we're the generation of like, just throw some dirt on it, move on kind of a thing. And they are like, no, they just
Yeah,
don't look at it the same way. Right.
right.
So we have to acknowledge that that's the case. So then how do we work with it? Like you said, so they can say, hey, I might just have a way of looking at this differently than you do. It doesn't
Mm,
mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean I'm being disrespectful. Because sometimes I think businesses do kind of get into that place of, well, this is how we've always done it. But especially for people who have ADHD, we see gaps. We see, and autism too.
yeah,
Like, you
yep.
see the pattern recognition. You see things that they just might not be seeing. Let's be open to what they're suggesting. I've had that several times in my life when I had more corporate jobs where I'd say, well, why are we doing it this way? I'm going to do it this way. And I would streamline something and it'd be like, well, why didn't we think of that? And the fact that that amount of people are saying that they're neurodivergent, I agree. I think it's just we're better at assessing it now, and I think now more people are much more aware. And
Yeah.
because we tend to attract our own, we usually do marry and have kids with somebody else who's neurodivergent. And so yeah, there's just, it's out there. So people can't keep saying it's not a thing. I love it when people are like, that's not a real thing. I'm like, yeah, I think you're wrong.
Right, right.
Lived experience is telling me very different. So
Yeah.
what is one myth about neurodivergent entrepreneurs or Gen Z workers that you would love to
Hmm.
dispel for the leaders listening right now?
Hmm. I think it's important to realize that, like we said, I think there's one study that said that ADHDers are 500% more likely to be entrepreneurs. People with dyslexia, they're like in the 230% more likely range to choose an entrepreneurial path. There are several famous autistic entrepreneurs like Bill Gates and Einstein and Nikola Tesla, but a lot of people base their concept of neurodivergent brilliance from depictions in movies and pop culture and stereotypes, right? And
Mhm.
while there are some really quirky, nerdy, brilliant, neurodivergent entrepreneurs, we show up quietly too, like
Yeah.
identifying patterns that save an organization from a devastating loss or help them choose, an innovative path forward. Those people who are asking hard questions that are facilitating better solutions if people are willing to not be offended by that.
Yes.
Some of us, that shows up in knowing something won't work, maybe not being able to tell you precisely why, but those patterns are patterning, making teams better because they're the spark of innovative thinking. But stereotypes limit what people associate with entrepreneurialism. And some of the most entrepreneurial traits of neurodivergent folks are the ones that are clocked as annoying. And so
Mhm.
we really need to widen our perspective of how that appears in our teams, in, their side hustles, in their organizations, because what it ultimately means is solutions, seeing ways to move forward in really complex and challenging circumstances, which I think we could all say we're in right now,
The
but
world's
it might
on
not.
fire.
It is, let's be honest,
Yes, the
but
world is
it
on
might
fire
not,
and
it might not
yeah.
look like what you think it would be. I think that's the myth that I would dispel.
I think too. So, yes, people who are neurodivergent are definitely very entrepreneurial. And they say this regardless of uh, ADHD status, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. So, if you have a manager that's not getting it, whatever, or, you have a staff member who's trying to say, hey, I'm seeing this problem over here and I think I know how to fix it, and you're blowing them off. Those are the people who are going to quit and then become your competition.
Absolutely.
Just something to think about, you know?
Right.
So
Food for thought.
so going back to the topic of unmasking, I would love for everybody, not just neurodivergent people, but I would love for everybody to just be able to be themselves, right? It is, as we've mentioned, it's exhausting. It takes a toll on mental health. It takes a toll on how you view yourself, that you even exist if you feel that you are having to be this other person all the time, right?
Yeah.
So, for people who are afraid of dropping their mask, what would you say helps the most? Either
Mm.
at the personal level or a systems level? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is a big conversation. And I want to acknowledge that it's very personal, deeply personal, and situational. There might be areas in your life where you feel like you can unmask more than other areas in your life where you feel like it's not safe enough. And that's a reality. So I want to acknowledge that it's tough. And it's something that we're always navigating is safety. It's especially tough at other intersectionalities such as race. Definitely tougher for Black women to unmask than white women, as an example.
Mm,
But as you're on this journey, I like to challenge people to begin by asking, what's the mask and what's me? And one way we can understand that is by really investigating how ADHD or autistic traits manifest internally within us. A lot of the conversation about ADHD, a lot of the conversation around autism is really broken down in what's observable, what the DSM
mhm.
says, but that doesn't reflect our internal experience. And that's why a lot of people don't self identify as ADHD or autism until way later in their life and seek appropriate assessment because they don't see themselves in that external observable criteria. So, for an example, one of the criteria that I didn't resonate with was autistic people take everything literally. And I was like, what do you mean? I was a lit major. I understand metaphor, I understand humor. But the internal experience is more like sometimes missing implicit references, sometimes missing the inside jokes. It means that I'm precise with the words that I choose, that I mean what I say, and I expect other people to mean what they say. But that's not a neurotypical norm, right?
Mhm.
And so digging into what your experience of your neurodivergent traits are and where you've covered up your experience so that you could fit in. That's a big one.
Yes.
Another part of this journey is identifying your support people. Who are your safe people? Who can you vent about this to? Who's going to understand that internal experience? I also want to just put a pin in a couple really big things to think about. One is skill regression. As we begin to understand our experience more, as we begin to unmask, it becomes impossible to remask. some of those areas. And it's expressed as skill regression because we just can't cover the way we used to cover before when we see what our true level of expression is. And that's actually okay. So if at one point in your life you were making like these large complicated meals and now it's tough to follow a recipe, it doesn't mean you're broken. It just means you've been like doing that and causing yourself weeks of exhaustion. And now you're saying no more. I don't need to
Mhm.
do that. I need to be my authentic self. So that's one thing, skill regression. The other is internalized ableism, which is particularly tricky for I think for women who are late in life discovered and diagnosed because we've been taught that we're wrong, that we're not enough,
Mhm.
that we need to perform to a standard that wasn't made for us, or we're not going to be loved. We're not going to be included. We're not going to be accepted. And that gets buried deep. That's way down in there. And it
Mhm.
makes us feel like we can't express needs. We can't
Yes.
ask for support. But what we need to ground and root ourselves in is our inherent worth. That it's not despite of, but because of our variance, our difference. So that's part of the journey. So yeah, we could talk about that all day long.
I know. That yeah, the feeling like we can't say what we need thing, I say all the time, we are the worst people when it comes to asking for help. We don't
Yeah.
do it. Part of that is, I think, rooted in the fear of that people will think we're incompetent or
Yeah.
lazy because that's been our
Mhm.
experience of some level of that being thrown at us. I think women in general struggle to ask for help, just patriarchy, right?
Yeah.
But also, when you are also neurodivergent, it just adds a whole other layer that people don't really get. And I think that it also is why so many women are afraid to mention to HR that they have this, right? Like now they're going to
Right.
see me as incompetent and I don't want that. So I'll just, white knuckle it my entire life.
Mm.
And it's exhausting. You can't do that. I mean, you technically can, but at the expense of what? And it's not
Mm.
just your integrity and things like that. It literally is at the expense of your health, your
Yeah.
mental health. There's just so many areas where this is such a big thing. And you can't always be your authentic self in every situation
Yeah.
cuz whatever. However, where you spend the most amount of time, whether, work, with your family, your friends, that's where you should be able to be you and
Mhm.
be able to also understand that not everybody's going to like you and that's okay. But that's hard,
It is
especially for
so
those of
hard.
us who have rejection sensitive dysphoria. That can really like be a big old pain. And I want to when you mentioned skill regression, I can't tell you how many clients I've had who've said, after I got my diagnosis, I felt like my ADHD got worse.
Mhm.
Or they're being told by people in their life, you're blaming everything on your ADHD. And I'm like, okay, first of all, I don't think you're actually blaming it. I think you're naming it because
Yes.
you're discovering this too, right?
Self-advocacy.
Yes. And that's what you're doing. You're saying, you know what? This is something just, I can't do anymore. Like
Mm.
I'm doing it at the expense of, like you said, like the cooking. I used to cook when my kids were babies. I made everything from scratch and blah, blah, blah. And a few years ago, I just sort of did the quiet quit on the cooking and waiting for somebody else to pick it up. I'm like, I live in a house with 3 other people who can cook. And they just started, like, recently, like, going, "Oh, maybe we should start cooking more." Because I was like, this is just not I hate cooking. It requires so much executive function. I
Yeah.
have to know what I need to do ahead of time. It's just not where my brain is gonna excel. I would rather use
Yeah.
that energy for something else that would help my family. That is not it. And
Yeah.
so when people are starting to do that, and there's always going to be pushback from the people who are used to you doing everything because you've been afraid to say no out of that fear of being labeled incompetent or whatever. There's always going to be some pushback, but the ones who are meant to stay in your life, in my opinion, will back down. Part of it is they're like, wait, what's happening? Right. I'll give people space for that. They got to figure out some new stuff too because
Mhm.
they're learning a lot about you as you are learning about you. But yeah, I think that's something that the unmasking thing I think is a really important thing. And for neurodivergent people to embrace the unmasking as much as you can, because first of all, you're gonna have a lot more energy. Like, it
Right.
really is exhausting.
So much work.
you're just going to feel better about yourself. You're going to do better work. You're going to be a better friend,
Yeah.
parent, kid, whatever. Not that you were terrible before, but when you're using all that energy to be somebody that you're not, you know what I mean? Like, just let's use that power for good, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
And
yeah, and there's this, like, hidden, um, detrimental thing about it too, that if we're always showing up as a person that we think people want us to be, we can't be truly known. Like, how can we
yes,
truly belong? And so it's okay for us to renegotiate relationships so that people can truly know us. And if they decide that
hmm
they're gonna move on, then let them have their path because
yeah,
you wanna make room for people who see you, know you, and value you as you are.
yes. What I have told people in my life is when you are trying to desperately hold on to these people who may not be the best fit for you,
Mm,
you're not allowing the space for the people who want to be there, who love
that
your long tangent-filled stories, who love, the fact that you're always, like, coming up with ideas that they're like, "Where did that come from?" But we know how we got there, right? Like, you want the people who are gonna love that, who love that you're direct, who love that whatever it is, you
yeah.
gotta have the space for them. So clear out the people who don't belong there. They can go do their own thing. Anyway, okay. Can you walk us through what happens when your approach to neuro-inclusion shifts the trajectory of a project or a team for the better? Like, what does that look like in general?
Oh, so many places we could take this. I think the story is so as an example, when we'll take this to professional development again. When we're creating a curriculum, when we're putting on an event, and we start from the very start, listening to, what the inherent barriers are, designing for the margin, as Ludmila Preslova says, brilliant author of the Canary Code. And we're designing from the very start to remove barriers and to be neuro-inclusive. Invariably, when we get to that experience, when people finish the curriculum, they're like, wow, that was great. I just really felt like there were multiple ways for me to like take in this information and to express, what I was learning and interact in different ways. It was just, this was great, but they can't really put a finger on why it felt different or distinct to them. And often it's because we've employed multiple means of accessing content and integrating it, multiple means of interacting with content, centering it in our context, and thinking about how we will apply it and practice with it. We've incorporated time blindness support at our in person events.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Okay, sorry. Wow. Love that.
I mean, all of these things that are strategies that support neurodivergent folks, but everybody else is just like, wow, this was a breath of fresh air. I just really enjoyed that. And then we can, big reveal, ta da! These are best practices for neuroinclusion. And it really advances the experience for everyone. It takes it to a new place. Often stakeholders will say, well, yeah, of course that's a best practice. But we as designers will say, but are you consistently applying it to every one of your programs? Are you applying these best practices of communication with your team, with how you train your own peeps, in new skills and upskilling at work? And that's where it breaks down, right? We can identify something feels good to us when we're in it. And that's how I like to lead by example in our program design is by debriefing on those strategies at the end of a program, whether we're able to, verbally express it if we have time, or we just share it as a resource. This is why this experience was distinct. And you too can apply these strategies where you are, whether it be in your organizations, your teams, or in training, in order to create spaces that are neuro inclusive, which is better for everybody.
So, okay, so many things I want to touch on here. Okay, I love that you have multiple means of getting information. I have been preaching about this forever about schools too. Like,
Mm,
I wish that they would have, like, okay, my visual learners, you're going to do this. My auditory, you're going to do this. My kinesthetic learners, you're going to do this for the same information, the same knowledge, but in a way that works for how their brains work, right? And
mm,
then every
mm,
once in a while, mix it up a little bit and have the doers do the listening and whatever, just so, because then that helps with perspective taking. Like, oh, wow, I
mm.
can't believe they can get all that in just listening. Because people with ADHD, as I'm sure you know, a lot of us have auditory processing
Yep.
disorders. You giving me verbal instructions, Yeah, good luck with that. Not gonna work for me. I need
Multi-step,
to
yeah, no,
Oh, if it's a one-step thing, fine. Without a lot of
maybe.
detail, fine, but my brain will suddenly go, "I'm not what's going on?" I have to have everything written out because
Yeah.
I will not remember it. That's also something for leaders to understand too, is like if somebody's asking you to have something in writing, who, maybe
Mhm.
does they may not know they have an auditory processing disorder. That's not something that's as commonly known for ADHD, but I think I read that, like, at least 30% of our population has it. I'm certain I
Mm.
do.
Yeah,
If you wanna make sure things don't slip through the cracks, have everything in writing. You should do that anyway. Then nobody can say that they didn't know. And the time blindness
right.
aspect of it. Can you expand a little bit on what you do with that?
Mhm, mhm. So a couple of things is agendas. Like if we've got a day long program, the agenda is not just times, but includes um, the length of time. What that equates to is the length of time in signage. Like if we're having people walk to different parts of like a hotel or conference complex, we're indicating how long of a walk that is, right? uh,
Okay.
in breaks, countdowns on the screen so that it's visible, time is visible. And so we're trying to help people not only understand like how much time is allotted for things, but interpret time. Because that's where time blindness comes in and several different levels of executive function challenges is understanding what time means to me. The internal experience of time is just different for ADHD.
Mhm.
And interpreting how I move in space and time is different.
Yeah.
And so we have to allow more time for bio breaks and few side quests before people come back into the room in
Yep.
conversations, but make time visible and help people interpret what time is going to mean as we're navigating from space to space. Another way in asynchronous learning is I like to include like an executive function lesson at the beginning to help people assess like how you feeling about these different areas and here are the supports that are in baked into the course, but also here are some of the things that you might consider to support yourself when it comes to
Mhm.
initiating, estimating how much time things will take. We like to give time estimates for activities and we always show how much time like media is and will take to consume. And we love to allow people to like choose the speed at which they're consuming media whenever possible. I'm at least a
Oh, I am at that.
1.5xer.
Y Yeah. I'm like 1.75 to 2,
Yep,
unless there's a lot of detail, then I slow it down a tad so I can write it. But
exactly.
if I have to listen to it in, like, neurotypical time, oh
Painful,
my god, my head would explode. So,
painful.
yes, time blindness is such a big aspect of ADHD, and people sometimes still don't really realize, even people who've known for years that they have ADHD, I'm still stunned. How did I still underestimate how long this would take? Like, how do I still
Right.
do this, right? But a lot of times, if you've never been in that scenario, if you're doing something new, you don't know what you don't know, right? And then you
Mhm.
go, "Oh, wait, I have to go do this other thing." And yeah, it's just and what you said is like, what does time feel internally to me? Because if somebody says 5 minutes to a neurotypical and a neurodivergent, those are two very different
So
amounts of
different.
actual time.
Yeah, yeah.
Neurodivergent, that's gonna feel like 15 minutes minimum, probably. And so they're gonna be like, "Oh, 5 minutes, I can go," and they think they can do so much more than they can in 5 minutes, and I know that from experience. And so I am very anxious about time because I
Mhm.
know I don't check it. So I typically am early for everything
Me too.
because I have so much anxiety. I'm like, I can't be late. I can't be on time is late. I can't be late. But
Right.
I also realized I inadvertently built in transition time for myself, which is a good thing. Like, I don't like
Mhm.
showing up and then just like going right, even if it's lunch with a friend. I like a minute to just like take
Yes.
some deep breaths, right? The visualization of time is a good point. I love visual timers to keep you on track and all that. Anything that can make you it a more tangible thing, because time for
Mm.
us is very abstract at best.
It's so weird.
Yeah. Okay, so what practical advice would you give to a woman who is navigating a new diagnosis, especially those who have been high achieving
Mm,
and secretly like struggling under the radar? What advice would you give them?
where to begin? I mean, some of the things that we've talked about already in finding community, something that was important to me personally as I was navigating the beginning of that journey was other people's stories. I found it really healing to hear people talk about their experience. But I also found all kinds of nuggets in what might be supportive for me, things I wanted to try. So I would definitely say find community and connect to people's stories, identify your support people. Another tactic that I share with so many women that I have this conversation with is practice attuning to your nervous system. The reason why is we're often dissociated and disconnected from our nervous system, which is why we don't know we need to go to the bathroom or eat until it's like way late. Accidents happen. We want to eat our arm off, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Attune to the body. This helps us, discern challenges before they become crises so we can pair them with strategies that we know work for us. It helps us identify when we need to prioritize rest before we hit burnout and honor our way of being. Stop calling ourselves lazy. Stop making ourselves feel guilty about rest. Realizing rest looks different for us than it does for others who are like, wow, I'm so refreshed after a good night's sleep. When we don't sleep through the night, we
And
sleep
then wait till you
entirely
get to
differently.
perimenopause and menopause, then you're really in trouble.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, let's talk about that. Understand how those cycles work and work against you in neurodivergence. So
yes.
again, we could do an entire conversation about this, but every cell in a woman's body has estrogen receptors. And when your estrogen dips that 1 week during your cycle each month, your symptoms, they're going to knock up. When you're in perimenopause and your estrogen is like this, your symptoms are going to be like that too. Your traits are going to be amplified. And when you're in menopause, good golly, it's a different world, different brain.
Yeah, because people don't realize that estrogen is directly linked to dopamine. And
Yes.
so, when your estrogen drops, your dopamine availability drops. So it's very interconnected for people who
Yeah.
are on ADHD meds and they go, it's so weird. The week before my period is like, did I take my meds? I'm like, yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
And for women who don't have ADHD and they're now in menopause, they're like, I'm like, welcome to where I live. But now
Right.
mine's 1,000 times worse. So
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, there's a
Estrogen
whole bunch of
also helps us control cortisol. And so when you don't
Mhm.
have very much estrogen, stress and stress related crash outs are more prevalent.
Mhm.
Estrogen also mitigates inflammation in our bodies. And so without estrogen, we have more chronic illness. We experience more pain and
Mhm.
associated symptoms. If you have POTS or Ehlers-Danlos,
Mm.
those can also be inflamed as well. And so there's a lot of things. And so understanding the estrogen connection, really important for us.
Yeah, I agree. And it also keeps us from, killing our newborns and our husbands. So, it's what makes us quote unquote soft. And I'm just like, you know, that's why, when women start to lose their estrogen and there's more with the husband, and I'm just like, okay, guys, this is what we would have been like from the start if we
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
have estrogen. So just love us how we are. That's all I'm saying. All right. So we are going to now do the rapid fire round. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions and just answer whatever comes top of mind. No pressure, just kind of fun to do. All right. Ready?
Let's go.
Okay. All right. Are there any ways that your neurodivergencies surprise you in your day to day work life still?
Surprise me still. I have to say, when I get those aha moments, all of a sudden an insight crashes and lands. I still get surprised about that. Something else that surprises me is because of my neurodivergency, I don't read into people's cues about how much they like or respect contributions I've made, work that I do. And when people send me a compliment, I have to write it down, otherwise I'll forget it. But I'm also like, wow, really? And they're like, how did you not know that, Tracy King? I'm like, yeah, my brain.
I totally get that. I totally get that. I'm just like, thank you. Really? I never thought about writing it down. That's actually, I should do that because sometimes I need that. Okay, next question. If you could wave a magic wand and fix one common misconception about ADHD, what would it be?
Oh, just one? That's too
I
hard.
know.
Um, I think I would fix the misconception that it's not prevalent. And people have no idea how prevalent it is, and research is backing that now. And I think the new DSM edition will, if it doesn't come out with a separate neurotype of the combined type, it will at least express that the combined type is its own unique experience and that there's so many people fall in that bucket. And when people understand how prevalent it is, the response rate seems to like kick in. They're like, oh, that's actually a lot of people. We should do something about that. I wish it didn't work that way. But I think that
Mhm.
prevalence piece is really, really important. And I wish people knew how many of us there are.
Yes, it's so much more than people think. Agreed. All right. Next question. Book or podcast you recommend for anyone beginning their neuro inclusion journey?
I mentioned Canary Code. That's great for thinking about the workplace. Something that was really important to me in my journey was Devin Price's work on masking autism. I was like, oh, are you talking to me specifically? Thanks, Devin. But I'm definitely a book person. I love podcasts, but because of auditory processing disorder, it's hard for me to stay in the conversation because I start thinking about things. But I would definitely recommend your podcast,
Thank
especially
you.
for women. Yeah, because it's really grounded in people's experiences, but also it's important for us to connect with empowering stories so that we can see ourselves in our own empowered story.
I think that's one of the biggest things of feedback I get is I see myself in so many of these stories, and when you're talking about different things, I go, "Oh my gosh, that's what this is," and, they just feel seen, which is really what
Mm,
I hope for, so thank you for saying that.
yeah.
Alright, so next question, favorite ritual or tool that keeps you energized during a tough week?
Naps. uh,
Speaking of ADHD energy and neurodivergent energy, right?
yeah. My morning routines are really important for setting me up for the day. And I think it's important for people to realize that a lot of neurodivergent people, especially ADHDers, we don't create habits. Our brains don't develop habits. Routine is how we create like consistency and comfort in our day, and realizing that we have to think about every single step in a routine. I think people don't realize that a routine isn't automatic for neurotypical people, but that how I begin my day really impacts the rest of the day. And I have a similar wind down routine at night that helps me again ground back down, recenter, prepare for rest. And for me, parts of those routines are candles, like visual stims, comfort items, a little fur baby snuggle, often
Love
reading
it.
or writing, things that just help me just calm my nervous system, relax, but also reconnect with things that are important to me because it's easy to continue to spin and spin and spin. But the beginning and the end of every day, that's kind of how I help mediate some of the highs and lows.
I love that, and I love your differentiation between habit versus routine. I
Mm.
never really thought of it that way. I kind of have used those interchangeably, and that's that's not actually accurate. I'm learning new things all the time, I'm telling you. Okay, last question. What is one workplace, quote unquote, rule you wish we could just toss out forever?
The first one that comes to mind, because there are many, is bus and seats. That seat time is productivity. That business hours is productivity. When we actually examine that norm and any bit of research around it, we know that that's not true. That making sure people are conforming to seat time is actually counterproductive for so many people. And if we only knew how much web surfing there is going on instead of actual productivity when you're demanding seat time instead of allowing people to like be active when their brain is at peak, I think people would be shocked.
Yeah, I think you are right. Yeah, if memory serves back from my corporate days, that's pretty true. Okay. Thank you so much, Tracy, for being here. This has been an amazing conversation. I think what you are doing is so important
Hmm.
because, and as you and I spoke about prior to this, just when people really start to understand what neurodivergency can look like in their organizations and how it can benefit them. And this shouldn't be about all about making the corporation a better. I mean, it is about making the corporation a better place, but it's also about allowing people to use their gifts to make that happen,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's neurodivergency or not, but definitely understanding that aspect. It just does nothing but improve, I think. And so I really am so happy you are doing this. I think it's so important. And I am just really happy that you are making things happen in that department.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Of course. So, how can people find you if they want to talk about it?
Absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn at Tracy King CEO. You can also find me. My website is www.inspired-ed.com.
All righty. So I will have all of Tracy's contact info in the show notes. And if you are tired of being on the ADHD hamster wheel and would like to get some help managing your ADHD better, I do see one-to-one clients. The link to apply for a clarity call to see if we would be a good fit for coaching is in the show notes as well. So the last thing I will ask is if you liked this episode, please do me a solid and follow the show, leave a review, and share this episode because the more people who do this, the more ADHD women we can help. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I truly appreciate it. And until next time, stay curious.